of this brief, I want to introduce our team. My name is Lena Brokob. I'm joined by Ashley Doherty and Marshall McLeod. I am with the Institute for Defense and Business, and Ashley and Marshall are with Heroes USA. Both are nonprofits that are committed to helping veterans transition out of the service. In creating this workshop today, we are hoping participants can kind of get a taste of the military transition program that the IDB is piloting this summer. The MTP is designed to help transitioning service members write resumes, do professional development skills like interviewing and networking, and ideally get you placed in your career. It also has this added bonus of the personal touch. When I got out of the service, it was really hard for me to filter through the internet and find the resources I needed to find to get through school, to get a job. What the IDB and what the MTP program offers is that personal connection, mentorship, and getting you through the struggle of transitioning. It's also got a business analytics concentration, so you'll get a certificate. It's grad level credit, and if you'd like to know more, at the end of these slides, my contact information will be on there. So at this time, I'm going to pass it along to Marshall.
Yes, thank you, Lena. Great introduction and fantastic. So just to give kind of a little bit of background, Heroes USA has partnered with the IDB in this respect to assist in what we do. I mean, our core strategic values are to really assist in bridging the gap between, in a lot of cases, active duty to civilian landscapes. And how do we do that? Well, we combine a lot of different things. For instance, myself, I've got both enlisted and commissioned services, prior service, and I've had a lot of experience throughout the corporate America, right? And so we combine all these different things and a whole degree of backgrounds throughout the United States at offices located in 7 different places at this point, and really help with those front-end products. For instance, resume building, cover letter writing. We assist with overall career development to include mock interviewing. And really, it's kind of the same in the way that the IDB operates in the case of a one-on-one connection. You'll be connected with a VTS or veteran transition specialist and work with the individual all the way until your actual employment. So, that being said, we're going to go over a couple of things within resume writing, really get into depth in both the civilian and also the federal style resumes. And so I'm joined with, or by, Ashley Doherty.
Good afternoon, everyone, and just to kind of give you a little bit of my background, I actually joined Heroes USA as a military spouse. I had seen the uncertainty and struggle of transitioning. My husband transitioned about a year before I joined Heroes USA, so kind of saw that and went through that. So we're going to start talking about types of resumes, and we're going to kind of break down a little bit of the format. That's one of the biggest things that civilian or military we see issues with, but a lot of times military have trouble translating skills. So we'll talk a little bit about formatting, then we'll talk a little bit about that translation. We'll see some examples. So types of resumes, we'll start with chronological. This is probably the most common type of resume. This just means a date-by-date history of your employment experience. And yes, even if you've been in the military for 20 years, you've changed ranks, you've changed positions, you may have cross-trained, so you do have a chronological history. Functional resumes, a lot of times I just use these if there's a significant gap in employment, if someone took 2 or 3 years off without being a full-time student to maybe just retire and enjoy retirement for a couple of years after separating from the military, or if they're a military spouse and they took 10 years off to raise their kids. We hear a lot of that. So functional I usually only use if there's a big gap in employment. There are some corporations, places like Booz Allen Hamilton and sometimes Lockheed Martin will specifically request that type of resume. A federal resume, if you're wanting a position in the federal sector, any federal agency, this is an extremely extensive resume, and we're going to touch on it briefly toward the end of this. So the first thing you want is you want to make sure the contact information is on your resume. So you want to make sure your name is on there. Now, if you go by your middle name, you want to make sure that that's noted so that they're not searching for Joseph when you go by Ryan. So just make sure that that's noted on there. For the address, we do not suggest putting your actual physical address, just privacy reasons anymore. We do city, state, and zip code. Automatic scanners will search for that zip code. They want to know kind of where you're coming from. So that's a big thing. Make sure that zip code is on there. For the phone number, put one phone number that is the most likely number at which you can be reached. People will put 3 different phone numbers because they want a lot of different options to be contacted, and from hiring professionals we hear, well, if they don't answer the first one, I have 400 other resumes that I have to look at, so I'm not going to try anymore. You also want to make sure you have a professional email. We suggest Gmail. It's just kind of the most updated. It's the one that is recognized as more professional for whatever reason. You also want to make sure that email preferably has something to do with your name so that it's easily searchable. And, you know, things like Epic Alejandro and Big Daddy 69 are not professional emails. You also want to have a LinkedIn address, and we're not going to really touch on LinkedIn specifically here. Professional networking site is a great way to give yourself a professional online presence, and having your LinkedIn address there means they can quickly access that page for supplements to your resume. So just as an example, this is a before, the address has been changed. This isn't an actual address that I know of. The actual house address is on there. There's only one phone number, but BigDaddy7@Yahoo is the email address, so you want to kind of avoid those things. This is what we would change it to. Change the formatting a little bit, first name, last name, city, state, zip code, change the email address, and then, of course, put that LinkedIn on there. You want a professional summary. For a federal resume, you may have an objective. For a chronological objective, it's kind of an outdated thing to put on there. You're going to change it every time anyway. So you want to have a professional summary. You want to make sure you have the job titles which you're applying to. Okay, you're a marketing professional, you're a communications professional, you're a social media marketing professional. They're all going to call this something different. They may include a lot of the same skills. If you have a security clearance, you can put that on there. You can put inactive. It's a lot easier to activate than to get. It's optional. If you're going into a position that may require a security clearance, go ahead and put it on there. If you're going into complete civilian sector, you're going to manage a grocery store, they probably don't need to know that you have a security clearance. It may show that you are capable of handling classified information, but it's not necessary. Number of years of experience, I tend to go with multiples of 10, 20, 30, rather than specific numbers saying, 27 years or 16 years, 15 plus, 20 plus, that kind of thing. Just makes it a little bit cleaner. It's personal preference. There are a couple of areas here. Possess a comprehensive background and an extensive background. We tend to suggest multiples of 3. So you put 3 big areas and 3 specific areas, and those will change. Those are keywords that will change or key skills that will change as you're applying to different positions. And then, of course, we suggest putting something like number of people on your teams overseen, teams of up to 60, things like that, and then amount of money. So, $12 million, $100,000, that kind of thing. And then, of course, you could put your branch of service, personal preference if you want to or not, career supported by your military training, of course, certifications, type of degree. If it's in pursuit, go ahead and put that it's in pursuit. Pursuit of a Bachelor of Arts in Military History. That's fine. They know that you're going for that, and that will be an advantage. Yes, Marcia?
Yeah, and I'd just like to, it's really important to point out that this is that top portion of your resume. We're no longer saying the objective, and Ashley did brief that's kind of, most of the people that we've met with and talked to in terms of national level directors of HR resources and talent acquisition, they're telling us these are the things they expect to see. not the objective. So it's important that we do point it out that that's where this information is coming from, of course. Now, also, that professional summary is in that top 1/3 that we've always heard about in a resume, right? So that's the part that you have around, it's called the 10-second test, which is oftentimes a misnomer. It's really through studies we've worked with outside agencies as well as some independent ones, Deloitte to name just one awesome one, is that it's closer to 4.6 seconds. That's not a lot of time. So these key areas that Ashley's highlighting here with the job title, how many years, how many, it's so critically important that they're captured there in the first portion so you capture that person's attention. As they've had 400 resumes to read over in the week, they're looking for every reason not to move forward with that particular candidate. Don't be that one, and use these systems. This is the proper way to do it.
Absolutely. So throughout, primarily, we're kind of pulling from the same resume for these examples. So this person, this is all they had for a professional summary. They didn't really have a professional summary. They had years of experience and secret clearance, but other than that, they didn't really have anything. So we took that, and remember all of those bolded things. Well, those are all the highlighted things here. So you get a lot more of what this person did. This person wanted to go into military history and doing potentially battlefield historian. So all of the things here, training, education, presentations, military history, all of that is relevant to what he wanted to do, and we really get a sense of what his talents are. So he didn't really have key skills. He used that little 4-bullet thing as key skills, but these are things we see a lot of: people-oriented, goal-oriented, driven, motivated. These are buzzwords. And every employee they're going to hire is expected to be motivated, driven, independently driven, able to work, on their own or with a team. Everyone they hire should have that. So you want to take that, you want to say, okay, but what do they really need? And they need things like team leadership. They need someone in the role he wanted to go into who can do research. They need someone who can train. They need someone who's good at communication. So those are all things that you want to focus on. You want to put those keywords, and that's going to be right under that professional summary to kind of put that all together and be in that first few seconds. And we will share this afterwards, so you'll have these slides.
And where is this information coming from, Ashley, as far as the keywords, and how do we look for those? How do we know what to put in the resume?
So your background and experience provide a good foundation for that, but you'll also look for these and pull them from job descriptions. So every time you apply, you pull those keywords, those action words if you can, researching, reporting, planning, and you put those into your resume. Okay, I have that. Okay, I have that. And you want to make sure that those keywords and key skills and qualifications match up. So this is kind of a breakdown of, once you start getting your position by position, you're doing a chronological, that's what we're going to focus on. You want to start with, okay, who is the company you worked for, in this case, the military, and this means employer, not military company. Location, which usually in the military is various locations. If you're National Guard, you may have one specific location where you were based, and then the dates. And you can do this position by position. You can break down the dates. We tend to do a little bit more general, but you can do it either way. What was your title? And we'll talk a little bit more about focusing on using the exact title when we talk about the federal resume, but we want to make sure that for military it's translatable. So whatever he was called in the military, Information Technology Director is the way it was translated for his civilian resume. Description of a role. So description is kind of what you did, what your overall duties were. Accomplishments, you put a bulleted list of anything quantifiable, numbers, things like how many, how much, how long, 12 presentations, 100 people, $30 million. Those are the kinds of things you want to use to grab attention. Rewrote the entire Army vehicle maintenance manual. And there are people out there, someone out there has to do that, someone has to write that, but it's great to know, especially if it's relevant to what you're doing. And you want to kind of limit. You don't want to do 20 bullets for every position. You want to pick the ones that are really relevant to what you're going to be doing, what you're applying for, and they'll really highlight your skills. So this was before. It wasn't really bulleted. You have things like PSVs and Tier 1 and static security. Well, we need to translate that. And anytime you have an acronym, at least the first time, write it out. You may think that, oh, well, everybody knows what that means. They may not. So how it all comes together, and this doesn't show the bullets, but it just kind of expands this, gives a little bit more detail, talks about, okay, we still got the security with the Iraqi Prime Minister, but it says, okay, how many combat patrols? High-level leadership, most notably. Regular basis, we might say, okay, weekly, something like that. But this just gives it a little bit more clean look and a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so we'll start going over some of the extras, obviously. There's a lot to a resume, right? There's the start, the middle, the finish, et cetera. But there's a lot of smaller elements throughout it. So you want to pay attention to certain formatting that may not seem like it's so incredibly critical, but it is, because you're sitting to somebody that's got several of these things in front of them. And again, we always say that the HR or the individual, for the hiring manager, is looking for a reason to move to the next candidate. They've got to read an incredibly complex document. I don't want to read one of those, and they surely don't either. Moreover, they don't want to do that 400 times. So if you can pick a particular format that's clean, easily digestible, then that's what you want to do. So that's the reason that these little tiny details are so incredibly important. Other things that, and Ashley will be a big person to push this throughout all of our other conferences, is that it is all about communicating and delivering a message to somebody, again, succinctly, but in a language you can understand. So the idea, for instance, SOP, everyone knows what that means. I thought they did, but that's not true. Someone out there doesn't know it. It means standard operating procedure. It's clear. We use it within the private sector, and we use it a lot in the military. Everyone has used it so much we've forgotten maybe what the middle word even means, right? So that's why it's so incredibly important to break it down and to communicate it. So we're talking about the extras, your education, your certifications, volunteer work, notable awards. Now that can be awards that can be both on the civilian sector, it can be within academic works, as well as your military experience. Most individuals have received some awards. So what we want to do there, and we'll jump right to it, is that they want to see the most notable, the coolest one. So just like within one of your military forms, for instance, an NCOER, which is an interesting word all in itself, but what you're going to find there is your highest level listed first, most often unless there was something wrong with the personnel issue there. So you're going to do the same thing within this document, okay? So within your volunteer work, everyone in the military does a ton of volunteer work. And why? Well, probably because we're people of service. That's what we've found ourselves doing. So it's important to grab that information. So where we can really showcase that here, it shows the employer a lot of things. There were several surveys, and I can't tell exactly which one. Of course, stats will tell you all different numbers, but a decent majority, which is probably around 20% if you ask any statistician, that around 20% of individuals that are making hiring decisions, they actually base it a little bit on volunteer work. It shows a lot of things, right? For instance, making a quality product and a tailored resume tells the employer that, hey, I'm interested enough in working for this position, looking at this opportunity, that I spent a couple hours doing this one resume for you, the hiring manager, versus I made this one and I sent it out 100 times, right? And that's what they're going to see a lot of. We're going to get rid of those immediately. So just another reason to list some of that volunteer work. And it may be right in line with the organization you're working with. For instance, if you're going into a nursing field and you're going to have to deal with elderly or young children, well, it'd be nice to know that you've worked with the various children networks, or helping elderly walk across the street and go to the grocery store, something like that. It can be simple, but at the same time you want to be able to capture that. Now, education certifications. We in the military go through a ton of certification. I'm sure that everyone here obviously knows that you never stop training in the various militaries. Now, of course, the jokes from branch to branch, we'll leave those for now, but you never stop training. So how do we capture that? Well, we put that within the education and certifications. You can also show perhaps a sublisting beneath that to say specialized military training. What you're going to do there is, although you've had SHARP training extensively if you're in the modern military. Now, what is that? Well, it's occupational health. It's a lot of those things. It's EO or EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that's of course the civilian word, that we focus on those employee rights and employee benefits and things like that within some of those classes, EO classes and SHARP. Well, you have to be able to communicate that. So are you going to specifically say, I am SHARP certified, train the trainer, et cetera? No, not necessarily. You need to translate that, much like Ashley was saying, throughout the resume, but you should also translate that there in education certifications, an invaluable location on your resume. Oftentimes we hear people, hiring managers say, they'll go through the skill set on the very top 1/3, those skill bullet points that Ashley had mentioned earlier, and then they'll go right to the certifications, depending on the industry, or they'll go right to the specialized training, because they want to know a couple of things. Can you continue training? Are you going to learn new things? What have you already learned that someone else paid for that I don't have to pay for now, that you'll do fantastic at this particular position, that you're the fit for this opportunity? So let's get that to fit there. Now, technical skills. This is a huge section too. Depending on the various job types within the military, you're going to have a whole plethora of exposure to software, programs, systems, things like that. For instance, you'll have access to certain signal software and communication software and networking, things like this. They're going to translate very easily to the civilian sector, right? There are some that aren't as, for instance, PBUs or something like this. Well, it's an inventory system. It's a property book management system. And we do have very close, very similar programs throughout the civilian sector that are used every single day. You might want to research and find out what those close proximities are to that particular software, and we'll capture and list those there as well. But it's not a bad idea to just list those, because oftentimes something like that within the signal world, that, again, because it translates so easily, because you use a lot of the same software, okay? But it's very important to point out the very simple things. Everyone wants to make sure that you're going to be able to communicate in the 21st century. That means sending and receiving emails. Now, I know that all veterans do this. We do it on a regular basis. We have the most complex, for whatever reason, email system that's so highly secure that you oftentimes could never even read your own email, right? So, that being said, you want to be able to, again, showcase that information here. Now, this is going to be at the bottom of your resume. I know that even 10, 15 years ago, we were told a couple of different things. First and foremost, that you might want to put perfume on a resume. That's completely out. They're digital now, okay? Also, that you use things like objectives. And Ashley clearly stated we do not use those on civilian-style professional resumes. And then finally, we don't list the education at the very top. Now, there are certain times when you most often will do this. That's typically within academia. That's also if that's purely your experience level so far, but that's not in the case of most of the people on this webinar and in this room, of course. You've had that experience, so it's not necessary to showcase and list that initially. They're going to find it. They're also going to see that in your summary, your professional summary as well, because it's career supported by professional military training, various certifications, and a BS, BA, MA, MBA, PhD, what have you, in that particular area, in that field, okay? So that's why these are very important, and it also helps to sum up and support the rest of the resume. So they're not just listed in some random bulletized form. Remember when we first started this brief, we talked about the very most critical importance of proper formatting. And again, it's because of the ease in reading and the ease in digesting of this crazy complicated information that we're trying to showcase to a potential employer, okay? So you want to make it simple. You want to make it simplified. I can immediately know that these are the particular notable words. Now, I don't have to know what all of these necessarily mean, but I'm pretty sure that those are all pretty cool. And I've heard some of these in the various war movies that I've seen. Okay, technical skills. I can quickly know that this individual has experience with Mac and, of course, with Windows systems. Now, software, that's also shown pretty easily. It's bolded. I can go to it immediately. I know that you hit that. Not to mention, I did mention it was a digital world, it's a digital place that we communicate in terms of our resumes in. So the ATS, which is another wonderful abbreviation, it's Application Tracking System. Okay, it's software that a lot of HRs use, and they do it for good reason. Tell me the last time you received 1,000 resumes and you had to make a hiring decision because of this project that's looming over your head that you just got a green light for, and you've got 72 hours to do it. You're going to use software. You're going to go ahead and filter through that information. They're going to be able to pick this information up through the software area, through the various educations. It's going to pick up the fact that you do have a Bachelor of Arts and things like this. They'll match, and it'll pass through the filters. And there's a ton of details more about ATS, how to get through that system that I'm sure that you either had some exposure to, or it's totally confusing and scary, and it kind of should be. That's, again, why formatting is so critical, and then also just going over the various keywords before. Yes, ma'am.
So just to reiterate that tailoring those keywords, making this easy, to really highlight that. We were in conversation a couple of weeks ago with people from UPS, and they said, well, sometimes we receive 40,000 resumes a week, just in a single 5-day period. They are not reading all of those. You bet they're using tracking software. So it's really important to make sure that those things, your resume is tailored and that you're putting that format in a way that's easy to read.
Excellent. Great point. And the fact that you're using this formatting over and over, it's going to become a lot easier as you learn these tips, tricks, techniques for tailoring each resume to the particular job. Cannot stress that enough. Each job. You don't tailor to an industry and hit send, or you will be filtered. You don't particular area of interest and then hit send. You have to tailor each and every single one of those resumes. And these are some of the ways to do it. Now, translating military skills. This is oftentimes, I'd say if not the most difficult, the second most difficult part of making a resume for a military person. We speak in a language oftentimes in the military that is so easy for us to understand that we meet that word bluff. Bottom line up front, I can tell you in very few syllables what I'm trying to tell you. And sometimes it's even grunts, which is even worse. Depends on branch, of course. Now, here we've shown how taking something, for instance, successfully performed patrols in combat which resulted in 50 enemy KIA and secured 15 HVTs. That's a lot of letters. More importantly, that's communicating some stuff I saw on Black Hawk Down once as a field civilian, and I don't know what that means. It sounds cool, but sounds scary. I'm not sure how that applies to the administrative position or the human resources assistant manager position that I have for you, and I'm not sure if you'll see the other employees as maybe high-value targets or perhaps enemies. So let's translate that. So instead, we went to superior security operations, management skills, led and conducted over 100 combat patrols over a 12-month period in support of operational Iraqi freedom, which resulted in the capture of 15 most wanted enemy combatants. I'm not even so sure about that. Let's take it a step further. But first I want to go ahead and pull some interest into, noticing some of the numbers here. Your eyes automatically go toward numbers, especially if you have, 40,000 resumes in a week? Yeah, you're going to go to those numbers really fast. But then also taking and communicating without the subject, in this case, I, me, we, our, and I succinctly sum up what's going to happen as far as what I've done, those actions that I've completed, and the results of those actions. Perhaps, again, remove the combatants, But again, do you see the difference here, how we take this very short, succinct statement, or again, bluff statement here, and then go and tell the individual, this is what happened. Now, this is directly related to what's called a STAR format, and I'm sure that you're familiar with this if you're familiar with behavioral-based interviewing styles, and that is STAR, S-T-A-R, which, great, I'm talking about more abbreviations, right? But it's situation, task, action, results. Now what does that mean? Well, it's a situation. I'm painting you a picture. I'm illustrating where this particular job title was, what it entitled, in some cases, the description of the overall events. The tasks I was given, right? We got ST, the tasks that I was given. Now, given those tasks, what actions did I take to complete said tasks? right? That's the A. Now we're to the R. The results. The results were following the particular actions. What were those? Okay, I produced some sort of thing. I did this, and this is what happened. That's what you want to communicate in every one of these bullets. So earlier Ashley was going over the particular areas. You have the title of the job, you have your title there, you have your description, and then you have your bullets underneath that. Those bullets are the R, A-R, A-R, A-R. So if you can think star, tar, 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 right? So that's what's happening. You're having action, result, action, result. I implemented some particular system over the course of 2 years that decreased overall labor usage by 2.5%, thereby saving the company X, right? So I implemented some new system. I gave you a specific time frame, so I gave you the situation. The task, well, I was probably limiting our overall labor usage. And the results were, I probably saved the company money, and this is how much. So you're painting a great picture for that individual that's trying to find a reason to move past your resume onto the next one. And you're doing that here. So again, the most difficult part is going to typically be translating those things. Now, there's a lot of different resources, and we'll go over some of those. But, of course, there are key words that do not translate. They don't just translate. For instance, battalion or brigade. You don't want to use words like these. You don't want to use HVTs and SOPs. You want to get to the real meat and potatoes. Ask yourself when you're writing this, well, what does this mean? Right? Each one of these, apart from the resume, make it entirely narratively based, much like a federal, and we'll go over that in a moment. But get down to the point. What am I actually trying to communicate? And does this make sense to someone that's never heard this language before? So, it's just incredibly important. So just to go over some more of the befores and afters, again, you'll look at this document and you'll see your eyes are immediately going to a couple of key places. Right, they're the highlighted ones, and for you sitting far enough away from the screen, it may be difficult. So you can see there's some bold stuff, some white stuff, and then some other information. But the key things you'll look at the very beginning, we have these power verbs. Things like supervised, right? We have oversaw, planned, scheduled, tracked, right? And that's what's really important. You want to start that bullet with a verb, and it's got to be something powerful. Now, it's going to invite me to read it. And more importantly, it's going to be backed by some particular language. Now, in this particular case, this individual was applying for a position that was directly related to some sort of aviation mechanics, specifically within helicopters. So it's okay to leave some of the verbiage. For instance, the H-60. Individuals in the civilian sector probably had a picture of those on their wall when they were 7 or 8 years old, and later they still know what that H-60 is, right? So it's okay to communicate as long as it's within industry, because back to what we said, we tailored it to the specific job. Would this individual have used the same resume if he was going for that HR assistant manager position? Probably not, right? So just be mindful of that. And then, of course, back to where our eyes are really showing some interest. 21,000 mishap-free flight hours. Now, that in pilot language probably sounds pretty cool. I'm not a pilot, but I've met some, and that sounds like a pretty difficult thing to do, because every time you walk out into a tarmac, there's normally some sort of mishap. So that being said, you want to be able to showcase those things. 100% mission completion rate. Those are big words. Those are solid statements. And, of course, those are the things that are going to win you the interview. And that's the whole point of your resume, right? So we talked about some of those tools that we use. For instance, we have some translation tools. Now, ONET's pretty cool. It's a great resource. You can put certain words in. You can also find solid documents on there that will give you the specific translation. For instance, battalion oftentimes isn't battalion, but if you think about it, it's a network of companies, and those of you that know what those things mean can kind of follow so far. But companies are made up of certain sections or departments, right? So now all of a sudden we have multiple departments that are comprised or surrounded by a single title called company, and then above that we have a battalion, which is a network of those. So think of that, those companies at maybe a local level. And then also when you go to a battalion, now it's at a district level. If you can think of a network of particular retail stores, you have a whole number of them, say 6 or 7, that's a district. Now you go to the store level, and you have the women's department, the men's department, the cooking and beauty department, things like this. So think of it more in those terms, because civilians understand those terms, okay? So that's some of the information you'll find on ONET, and like I said, a great solid, I think it's a 6-page product that'll tell you what a sergeant is, what a sergeant first class is, what a in this case, a captain or a major. What is that direct translation? And it's oftentimes not a CEO, so let's not just jump to conclusions when we're thinking a senior enlisted individual or a field grade officer is automatically a COO or any chief suite position. So be careful with some of the things you use. And then over to your military experience, going to military.com. Military.com is a fantastic resource too. It can be, you can put in your particular MOS and it'll cough out an entire list of different skill sets that you have. And that's what we often run into when we talk to vets. They say, well, you know, I was just pulling triggers and kicking doors. Well, no, you were doing a lot more than that, right? You were project managers. You were strategic planners. You were a lot of these things. You were team leaders. And in the civilian sector, that's not only a big deal, it's hard to come by real leaders. And I think anyone with enough exposure to a retail experience out shopping with your family, maybe on a particular holiday time frame, can see that perhaps leadership is something that might be lacking. It's a different word. So you want to be able to communicate that information, right? And oftentimes, although it is squeezing triggers and kicking in doors, the very few of us that did that, it is very easy to translate that to leadership, to management. And for the record, I wasn't that guy. It's total poke. But there's a lot of different resources also within our own. HireHeroesUSA.org has a lot of great products that you can pull from, and we'll give you those translation pieces. Obviously, working with the IDB and also Hire Heroes, you'll get some of that transition assistance with some of the translation. Okay, now I know this is what everybody came here for, right? Federal resumes, terrifying, daunting. They're incredibly complex. No one does them. Let's forget it and let's go get a job at McDonald's, Walmart, which, by the way, are both incredible firms to work for. They pay very well, and they take care of you, mentor you, and so on. I just like to use those because everyone else does. So back to federal resumes. Why are they so scary? Well, because there's a lot to them, right? The simplest, tiniest mistake can lose the job, lose the interview. You won't make it past the system, the ATS level 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden hiring a third-party individual that they do because they don't have enough time because they work for the government to review your resume. So now it's past all of those things and it failed somewhere. That's why. There's a lot to it, but instead let's look at it more simply, okay? It's back to formatting. It's proper formatting, not using grandiose, irregular font just to somehow stand in front of someone on a desktop, because it's never going to make it there. It's going to remain digital in that system. So let's not get too fancy with it. We're not realtors in the government arena, so photographs aren't needed either. So let's leave all those off. They're also not on civilian resumes either. So let's go back to this. So full name. This is really important because it's a difference between the federal and the civilian. You oftentimes will list your first, middle, and last. And the reason for it is searchability as well as it's just kind of a typical format given the federal sector, okay? Absolutely correct information. Citizenship. Now, this says U.S. Now, we're not talking about the United States of Brazil. Of course, that does exist, but that's not what we're talking about. Oftentimes, it will be a drop-down menu, so using just U.S. is absolutely correct. Okay, so only on a federal. This is big. Ashley's shaking her head, yes, right? So this is big. Objectives do go here, and oftentimes the federal format will tell you specifically it should have this in the header, and it should be listed in this particular way. And, of course, you want to put it in whatever format that particular organization wants you to have it in. This is a general format, and this is the one that we found to use that works the most. So this is a great starting point here. So we've got in it the objective. In that, it will also show you the announcement number or job number. Critical. You have to put this in here. If it's not in the document itself, it won't pass the first level of the application tracking systems. Okay. So, has to be accurate information. A lot of times people, I feel that may go after a federal resume and think, well, I've got an hour or so, I can go ahead and knock one out. But just like its pages are high, so are the hours in terms of an investment into a federal resume. I've heard numbers in the 20 to 30 to 40 hours. And that's a little high, but I think a solid 10 hours should be spent on research alone in your initial phase of creating a federal resume. And the reason for that, you have to go back in time and find every individual that was your supervisor. You have to find their contact details. You have to actually find out what you were paid, not, oh, about that. No, you have to know what you were paid. Now, of course, does that be the same exact cent? Not necessarily, but it is important to capture the absolute most accurate information. I can't express that enough. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go right over to the right before we get to the narrative portion. So it has to be consistent information, but also consistent formatting. So you notice that the left and right picture here, we're seeing that it's doing what? Well, what does formatting help us with? Well, it's the overall digesting of this crazy amount of information, and we thought it was a lot with a civilian resume, but it's a lot more with the federal resume. So you want to stay consistent with the formatting. So that individual, when it does finally make it to human eyes, which it most hopefully will after the 6 or 7 different episodes with an ATS software. So once it does, you want to make it to where they can flow through that, get that information quickly, okay? And then we're going to go up to the top right, where it's Veterans Preference Points. Now, there's a couple of places to go for this. You can go to the VA website directly. In it, you'll see where you can search just Veteran Preference Points, and we'll also send that out with the information packet. The exact address here, and it's up on the right. You guys can't see it because it's tiny, but you viewing it online can. So click through that. It'll take you through it. It's going to be yes, no questions. Incredibly easy to follow. Where you hear yes, did you do this? No. Did you do this? Yes. And it'll give you your points assessment. Now, of course, this is a difficult question. You have to go to the VA directly, as even your VTS and the IDB is not going to be able to give you a precise number either. So research this information. Find it. It has to be here. Now, why does it have to be there? Well, a whole number of reasons. First, the VA preference points are showing the government where you stand, what you're able to do, your capabilities. But moreover, it's also saving the federal government money in some cases because of the area of disability versus overall benefit and functionality back to the United States government. So there's certain grant monies that are allocated for individuals with perhaps maybe a higher point makeup. So that's the reason that it's there. It is the one place also that you will necessarily admit of some sort of disability. Of course, I have to go back to the civilian-style resume as well as the civilian-style interviewing and point out how critical it is that you do not share that information outside of this area because it's, well, against any type of rights that you do have as now a civilian. Okay, now down to the narrative formatting. This is the cool, fun part of a federal resume. You actually get to tell a story. It's written in a narrative sense, a narrative base. So you tell the first part of it, where I did, what I did, how I did this, and then also just the overall story, maybe moving throughout that position, how it started, how it ended, things like this. And you can look for examples, of course, online to help you structure it, but make this a point where you can really put in a lot of those keywords. You can take the keywords from the federal job description, which, of course, they will give you 6 pages of information. Look through that, print it out. And the reason I say that is because it's sometimes easier to print it out and then start highlighting, writing off to the side with annotation, say, oh, this is how I meet this particular area, this particular piece of this criteria that I have to have had done, rather, in order to meet this particular job. And this is a great place to really put some of that. Now, do this in a smart way. Don't just sprinkle like I do with commas sometimes. Really have a strategic plan in the way that you're going to deliver the information and say, yes, I did this, and this is how I meet this particular job title. And we've got some ideas and ways that you can do that as well. Okay, this is going to be at the bottom of it unless, on the federal resume, unless they ask you specifically to put the education at the front end. And this is a rare occasion. I've only seen it a few times, but this is where it generally goes. At the end, just like the civilian resume, that's kind of the close similarity. Now, just like within your overall honors awards, you're going to list your highest level of education first. For instance, if you have a master's, it's going to go before your associate's degree. That's just how it works, so make sure that it follows accordingly. You can simply put the month and year. Another difference that I might point out, you do not do that in a civilian resume most often, unless they specifically ask for the year of graduation, but that's kind of an interesting situation altogether. You do, however, put the year, the subject study, and of course the city and state of the institution. So that's some information that you need to always list in your federals. Sometimes, for instance, USA Jobs, does ask you for specifically, and they'll help to build that too. And that's another great resource, so you can start structuring your federal resume. Okay? And then also the awards. Now, in the civilian resume, and we went over this briefly earlier, you want to list your top 3 to 5. In a federal resume, you list every single accommodation, every single medal, you know, and all sorts of these different awards that you're going to be receiving. But you want to go ahead and capture all of those because they are important, because they are not only valuable, but the individuals reading it, more often than not, know what those things are. So, and they generally ask for that. Okay. And then any type of other information. This is a great place also, if you weren't able to put those keywords in or those specifics, you should have been able to, but you can reiterate it at the bottom. And this is the one rule where you can break with the civilian. You're not going to have a 10-page civilian resume. You can oftentimes find anywhere from a 7 to the maximum number I've heard now so far is a 29-page, I said 29-page federal resume. It's possible somehow. So, sure, as a Sergeant Major. All right. Now, we talked about some information as far as, you know, contact details. These are the contact details you can reach out to us. But, again, we have to show the critical importance of, first, formatting and proper tailoring of the civilian resume.
Yeah, so for those of you that have called in kind of in the middle of Marshall's presentation, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Ashley, so I'm the first contact up there. You can reach out to either of us with questions. And we did talk about formatting and did a breakdown of that. If you're interested in Hire Heroes USA services, just a reminder, it is free for anyone with United States military service as well as spouses. So we want to give you all the opportunity, for those of you that are following the webinar online, if you have any questions, go ahead and just use your chat function. Make sure it's set to everyone. We have found that it may default to only the host, but just make sure that's set to everyone and go ahead and type your questions. So anything that you want to follow up with Marshall's presentation or formatting questions, go ahead and ask those now.
I mean, you guys can verbally ask also.
I don't have a question, but I do have a point to make that might help clarify one of the major differences between civilian and federal resumes, as it was explained to me, and that is basically that in the search for a federal job, they require you to prove that you have already accomplished something, but in the civilian world, you can often get hired based on potential. So civilian world is, you know, hiring based on potential. Federal jobs are hired based on proven experience.
And that's a great point. We've heard oftentimes that within the civilian sector, for instance, you really need to work to find a position that you meet a minimum of 60%. Oftentimes we like to hear 80%. Of the criteria, of the requirements to get into the position. And that I think speaks to what you were saying. You're hired more on possible potential rather than these are the things that I've already done. And I believe part of that is that there is enough in the network in the federal sector, but then also there's a way to really quantify and capture that information that, yes, I have absolutely done this particular thing, whereas I think it's a little bit more subjective sometimes, I think, within the civilian sector. So you've got to make sure you meet those 100% of the time, or you will get 0% of the callbacks for an interview, of course.
Absolutely. So if anyone has any further questions, you can certainly reach out to myself, reach out to Marshall, or reach out to Lena. Lena, do you have anything else to add? It looks like we don't have anyone chatting in questions at the moment, so do you have any final thoughts you need to share?
Nope, I'm just going to say we've recorded this, so I'll send this out for everyone that missed it or wasn't able to get in, as the login part was a little tricky this morning or this afternoon. So I'm finished. Everybody else, we're good? Zach?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
When applying to civilian sector jobs, what would be the best way for us to differentiate when making a chronological resume? When to put the summary as the first thing or the education as the top?
Always put the summary at the very top. You may, if they specifically ask for someone who has graduated in the last 6 months and you meet that criteria, I would just add that as the summary, graduated whatever that within 6 months is, with a bachelor of whatever, and then I might add at the education at the bottom, I might say, graduated May of 2015 with this. But unless it is what we call a CV style or curriculum vitae style, where a lot of times they do want the education, if you're applying for something like a job at a university, a teaching position at a university, your curriculum vitae, you may put the education at the top because they only want you if you have a PhD or, whatever. So, but I would say 99% of the time, your professional summary should always go first. 99% of the time, your education is going to go at the bottom unless they specifically ask for that to be up there at the top.
That's usually something in education right out of school that they say put on the top, but because we have a lot more professional summary, that's usually why we say put that at the bottom.
Yeah.
Right. And just to kind of speak more to the way that you'll differentiate yourself, the way that you do stand apart is going to be in your overall appearance of your resume. What do I mean by that? I mean your overall formatting, the structure of it, and the keyword usage. Can you capture me within, remember that misnomer of 10-second rule, within around 4.6 seconds on average? Can you capture my attention and say, Marshall, I want you to read more? So, and you do that by, again, just clearly communicating and using some of these techniques that Ashley talked about during the initial part of the brief, of using, the skill portion and proper structuring and communication within that professional summary. Does that answer your question, though?
Absolutely. And I'm also curious, too, how we can correctly write out a summary at the top of the resume if we're required to also submit a cover letter without sounding redundant.
Okay.
So we have a couple of templates that we share, but we talked about those main things. You want to get your job title. If you have security clearance, you may or may not want to put that in there. Those, big three and little three. The cover letter is kind of a little bit more personal introduction. And, you may want to highlight those things that say, hey, I have 10 years of this. Well, that's going to be, spread out over your whole resume. Cover letter, boom. 10 years of training and curriculum development, 10 years of, human resources administration. So you've got that quick summary there. The cover letter is also a really good way to highlight, okay, I know that these people are looking for someone to come in and do this specific thing. They seem to indicate in their job description they need help with this. Or I know that this is something, that this position, they need help with this, because everyone in this industry needs help with this. And so you give them an example. Hey, a lot of times we see in human resources, this is the case, at my position at whatever, this is how I fixed it. So you give them an example. You tell them a very, very brief story of this is how I did something that you may not see the full story on my resume, but this is going to say, hey, this is why, one more reason why you should hire me. This is how I did. You can elaborate a little bit more.
And I'd love to jump in because I love this subject, that question, right? So cover letters are an incredible thing for employers because what they're saying to me is that you not only tailored a resume, you took the time on the front end to meet or to at least express to me that you're going to meet the needs of this particular position. Moreover, you spent hours of your time to show me this. I don't have to, I already have to, once I do hire someone on the potential of them being at least 60% of what they've said they were, if in the case they don't, I have to spend a lot of time to release them. It's not an easy thing to do. So if you can show me up front, then all of a sudden you have actually differentiated yourself. Now, I've talked to several HRs. I know Ashley will kind of giggle here on this, but we've talked to a lot of national recruiters that say, I specifically asked for that at the bottom of a job description to see if you read all of it, and it says attach a cover letter at the top. And you know what? I don't even read the cover letter. I don't care. I'm going to still do the same 10-second test, but the ones that didn't, they can be outstanding individuals, but they can't follow directions. So what they ask for, you need to do that. You need to respect that part of the, that hiring process. Now, we use a kind of a congruency portion or table within our cover letter, and Ashley was speaking to this. You know, kind of give it a left side, right side analysis of, you know, this is what you need. This is how I meet it specifically. And you're able to communicate that, and not necessarily a purely narrative sense, but it gives you that kind of more personable approach. So the ones that are read, they're read at that level. So it's not redundant because you're saying it, but differently and directly to the job specifically. Okay. Are there any other questions?
I don't think so, no.
Last chance. Alibis.
All right, we're going to end. Like I said before, we've recorded this, so I'll send it out. So everyone, thank you very much for coming to the first ever IDB Hire Heroes Resume Writing Workshop.